We're good. Good afternoon, or whatever time of day it is, whenever you're watching this. My name is Michael, and welcome to the Hobbyman and Hearn's Hobbies. We're going to be doing some tutorials on modelling today. We're going to be splitting it up into 4 sessions. This is the first one. We're going to be covering a range of topics over the course of the next 4 hours. Each session's broken up into basically an hour or thereabouts, maybe a little bit less, and taking a break in between each one. So if you're watching this down the track, welcome. If you're watching this live, I'd be encouraging you to ask any questions, and my colleague over here, BJ, is going to be available to read out the questions to me and let me know if there's anything that you would like to know. Now, I'm not an expert modeler by any stretch of the imagination. This is just little hints and tips and things that I've picked up along the way. And no doubt you might have some other ideas of your own. Everyone's got to really find their own way in modeling, and everyone's got their own methods and techniques that work for them. And that's fine, that's okay. If you find a better way, please mention it in the comments. And yeah, we can discuss it. Anyway, this first session, we're going to be about preparing to build a model, a couple of methods of actually putting them together, and the things that I do to prepare before I build a model. And we're going to look at some masking techniques as well. And masking is something that you do in preparation of painting a model usually. So as I'm going along, I'm going to be talking about a whole bunch of different products. It's important to keep in mind with a lot of modelling products, because sometimes you're using chemicals and that kind of thing. Safety is very important. You should always consider using gloves. You should always consider using masks, especially if you're doing spraying and airbrushing or spraying with rattle cans. Using thinners and cleaning products, sometimes they can be a little bit toxic. You don't always want to be breathing them in or getting them all over your hands. So safety first. I often use gloves. I often use a face mask and that kind of thing as well. Yeah, basically most of this stuff is kind of the basics and the first steps towards building a model successfully, but hopefully I'll be able to throw in some hints and tips that you might not have thought of yourself that you can then use in your own practice. So I've got a couple of different models that I'm partly building, and you'll see the same models pop up over the course of the next couple of tutorials. It's because they're ones that I'm building at the moment for the purposes of these sessions. So first of all, cleaning models, and most models come on these frames. They're called sprues. You'll notice that all of the pieces, the vast majority of the pieces are actually off the sprue in this instance, because I've already started building. But these sprues are typically made via injection molding. So it's where plastic is injected into a mold and then released. So you get these out of the box like this, and there's usually models will have several of these in a box, and you get them out like that. It's important to note that during the manufacturing process, there's typically oils and chemicals and that kind of thing that are on the sprues themselves and on the models. So it's really, really important that we give these pieces a really good clean before we do anything with them. A lot of people ask me about priming models, about putting primers on models. And one of the things that you have to think about from the beginning is what is going to be the purpose of the model. Some people that do miniatures use them in gaming purposes, and they're going to be touching them a lot and moving them and that kind of thing. If you've got a static display or a display that's in a cabinet or containers, that's a different thing. You're not going to be handling it as much, so it might not be quite as important to take certain steps. So when people talk to me and ask me questions about whether or not to prime, there's a couple of considerations that I always keep in mind. The first of all is how much handling it's going to have. If it's going to have a lot of handling, I would recommend a primer. If it's not going to have as much handling, then it's not so important. Primers are also important for things like filling in tiny little gaps and flaws, and they can be also beneficial if you're changing colors. So if you've got, so this is a very neutral gray, but if this sprue, say, was black and you're wanting to paint the piece a light color, like a white or a yellow, then you might want to prime it in a gray or a white to be able to do that without too much problems. Also, if the model is very flawed, you might want to prime it as well. I don't always prime my things, but sometimes I do. So it really depends on the circumstances. If you're doing miniatures, it's often a very good idea, but you want to prime it very finely because you don't want to lose detail as well. More important than the primer, though, is that cleaning process that I was talking about, because if you think about if there's oils and mold release formulas and chemicals and that kind of thing on your sprues and on your model pieces, then the paint's not going to stick to it, but primer's not going to stick to it particularly well either. So the very first step, whether you're priming or not priming, is cleaning your pieces. And there's a couple of different methods you can use for that. So I have got a few little bits and pieces here. If you want to change the view, please, BJ. These are just little pieces of resin that I have I've made. I'm just going to hold those up to the camera. As you can see, they are tiny little skulls. You see there, and they're I made silicon molds of some Lego skulls, and I've made these out of resin. Now these are just raw. They are tinted with alcohol inks, but because they're straight out of the mold, I wouldn't necessarily paint those or do anything with them off the bat. I'm going to actually use those in a later session, so I do want to clean them first. That's very important. So in this instance, I'm just going to put them in there in this little container. If you've got like an old ice cream container or an old Tupperware container or something like that, you can use that. So I'll just put them in there, and a little bit of water. At this stage, what I would usually recommend, I'm not going to do it here, is I would use a little bit of soap, detergent, something like that, and clean them. But it's very important then to rinse them off after you've cleaned them. I use old toothbrushes like this. These are just old toothbrushes that have got a bit worn. Fairly soft. You don't want anything too harsh, like a wire brush. And you can just give them a bit of a clean like that. Now, as I said, you'd be using soapy water, then you would be rinsing it, and because we don't want oils and chemicals on there, we also don't want soap on there because that's going to prevent paint from sticking as well. So just give that a bit of a clean, and I've got a piece of paper over here that I'm just drying them on, like that. Just giving those a little bit of a clean, just a gentle one. Doesn't need to be anything too fancy. Last one. Oh, it's a slippery sucker. Have you tested it with the extra paint? All right, so that's cleaning method number one. You're going to pretend that I've done two lots of that. Now, you can clean the sprues themselves. In fact, that can sometimes be a good idea. When all the pieces are still on the sprues, you can go ahead and just clean the sprues directly. Clean the pieces on the sprue before you're even cutting them off, and removing them is fine to do that. I keep a lot of these microfiber cloths. I find these really, really useful. You know, you can go to hardware shops, places like Bunnings, and you can get packs, you know, multiple packs for not very much money, and you get them a little bit over time, and they end up looking like that when you've used them a lot. Things like chucks, these are really, really cheap, and they can be used as well for cleaning, for drying, and I'm going to make sure our pieces are nice and dry. Over here, I put those pieces there just on a little bit of paper towel there, and we want to dry those off. Now, the next thing that I like to do, and again, depending on what you're doing, your methods may vary a bit. Another product that is very useful is isopropyl alcohol. This is just the Diggers brand that you get from Bunnings in a little spray bottle. I would also recommend just getting, if you're doing a lot of modelling like I do, you would actually get it in much, much larger amounts, and larger bottles are very cheap. Very inexpensive, and you can keep the spray bottles or get a couple of little spray bottles and use those. So just going to, sorry, fumble that. Just give that a bit of a spray and give that a clean. That'll wipe like that. And spray them all actually. And dry those off. Isopropyl alcohol cuts through any oils and chemicals, even the oils that just are in your skin naturally. Also, a good idea to clean your hands. Washing your hands with soap and water before you do any kind of modelling is a really, really good idea too. So let's give that a wipe, give that a dry. Now, isopropyl alcohol evaporates off really quite quickly. However, it can sometimes, if you leave it on, it can leave a little bit of residue, which I don't like. I usually like to clean that off myself as well. So just giving those a wipe off. You don't want to use, I use a microfiber cloth, so usually pretty good in this regard. You don't want to use anything that's too fibrous or anything that's going to leave behind little fibers and hairs and that kind of thing on the model itself, because obviously when you paint that, you can make a big mess. We'll just clean that off. All right, so that's done. Same with our pieces on the sprue. You can just give those a bit of a spray and wipe them off. Just like that. And they are ready to go. So that's a couple of cleaning methods. Water, soapy water, and rinse with water, get the soap off and dry them, and or a little bit of isopropyl alcohol can really start you off on the best foot. So another thing I'm going to be doing a little bit later when I'm showing some other methods is I've just got a couple of rocks from the garden, and I'm going to be showing some methods on this. This is the kind of thing that you might use in a diorama or something like this. So these are just some plain rocks. And again, these were dirty straight out of the garden, so I gave them already a bit of a clean, but I want to give them an extra clean just with, again, with an old toothbrush. Not one that you're currently using, obviously. Maybe someone that maybe an old toothbrush that someone else is using is fine, but not one that you're using. And give those a really good scrub, just to make sure any bits of grit and dirt and that kind of thing, anything that would stop the paint from sticking on it. And you can see that's a bit of dirt that's come off onto the cloth. I'm not sure whether that's coming up on the camera, but the cloth is starting to get a little bit dirty. So it shows that it is working. So I'm going to do that to all of those in time. Now, a couple of these pieces actually need a little bit of trimming and sanding. So that's another thing that you want to do when you're prepping. I don't know whether you can see there that there's a little bit of a nub on the top. I hope that's visible to you, but it's a little bit messy. So I'm going to use my nippers here just to clean off the top a little bit. Maybe a little bit with a hobby knife. A good hobby knife is something that's really beneficial to have have available. And that's mostly done. These pieces here are going to be a little bit on the rough side anyway, so I'm not too fussed about doing that. Another thing that we use to clean up our models are these sanding sticks. These are 9 steps sanding sticks, sanding pads. Really great products, and I use them a lot. They're really hard wearing. They last a long time. These two have several different grits on it. So 240, 400, 1000 and 1200 grit. So you're getting into some really fine stuff when you're going up to 1200. And these work great dry, but especially work really, really well wet. So I'm going to use the 400 there. I'm just going to get a little bit of my water, put it on the sanding pad, get my piece there, and sand that smooth there. Again, I'm not finessing this particular piece too much. You can see I'm getting a little bit of the grit there on the sanding pad. Now, the good thing about these sanding sticks and sanding pads is that they work really well wet, obviously, but if you're starting to get a bit of grit drying in them, plastic grit and what have you, you can give them a clean with a toothbrush like that. Again, same old toothbrushes that I'm using before. And yeah, so if you're getting plastic grit stuck in there, you can clean them really easily, dry them off, they're off, and then they're good to go. If these are too large for your purposes, you can actually get a hobby knife, and because they're foam, they cut really easily. They've got nice sharp edges, so you can get alongside an edge or a corner. You can cut them this way if you want to, if you need them thinner. So they're great little things, and relatively inexpensive as well. So that's just an example there. Where's my sprue gone? Here we are. So these bits here that I was cleaning, I'm not actually going to be using these in the model itself that I'm doing. These were variants on the wing, so different variations of the Spitfire that I'm doing over here have these as a piece. So I'm going to just show you a little bit of method in terms of getting the pieces off the sprue. What I typically do is use my nippers to cut a little bit away from where I need to. I've got that piece there. Now, that piece there, obviously it's got a little nub on it. So what you can do is you can either use your nippers or use a hobby knife just to get that off. Now, obviously this piece here, that bit there is not going to be visible. It's going to sit inside the wing. So you're not going to see that. Doesn't matter if it's a little bit messy, but if it was a more visible piece, then I would go ahead and sand it like that with my sanding sticks, just to make sure that is as smooth and nice as possible, so that on the model itself, you're not seeing the plastic seam lines and that kind of thing. Now, I'm going to show you something on this Spitfire that I've already done, and show you some of that sanding process. Now, this is going to look very messy. I apologize for that. It is going to be obvious as to why a little bit later. Now, I don't know whether you can see here, but I've glued these bits together, and it's a little bit on the messy side here and along the leading edge of that wing.
I'm going to try and zoom in a bit for you there.
All right, no worries. BJ's just going to zoom in. Now, don't worry about all of this messy paintwork here. That will become clear later on what that's all about. All right. Okay, so there's... yeah, that's out a little bit. Yeah, about there. Don't know whether you can see, but just along that edge there, it's quite messy. Along that edge is nice and smooth because I've sanded it. So this is where the two parts of the wings, the top half and the bottom half, are glued together. And that edge along there is a little bit on the messy side. So I'm going to just show you again. I'm going to start with my 240 grit. This is that one there. Put a little bit of water on there. And I'm just going to go ahead and sand that edge. So I'm starting with the 240. You can see I've got a little bit of the grit there from the wing. Now that is now a lot smoother, but as you can see, I've got a lot of that plastic residue there. You need to clean that off before you go ahead and do any painting or anything else. So I'm just cleaning that off. In this particular instance, there's a couple of little holes there which are part of the model. So I want to get my toothbrush and just clean all the grit out of that and make sure it's dry. Okay, so I've done my 240. I'm going to go now to the 400. Do the same. So this is a finer grit. So it's going to give me a smoother result. So as I said, ignore all of this messy painting here. That what that is going to become clear a little bit later on today in the stream. So that's now a lot smoother, but again, I've got the grit there, so I'm going to clean with my toothbrush and I'm going to dry off. Now I've already broken a piece off that, and that bit's looking like it's going to go. It's been in and out of the box so many times. All right. Okay, so that's getting a lot smoother now. And then you can move to, again, that's the 1000, which is going to be, again, a little bit smoother. I've got to remember which side I was doing here. Is that side wrong? And so on and so forth. So I'm going to show you another bit of that model there. There's another bit there that I did. And again, the top of that model, really, really messy. So again, put a little bit of water on. Go straight to my 400 here. And just smooth that out. There we go. Smooth that out a little bit so you're not seeing that seam line anymore because I've kind of mostly got rid of it. I'm going to go in and do the 1000 as well, the 1000 grit. Make sure that's super smooth. Now, what I have almost lost is those panel lines across the top. So I'm going to go ahead later on and carve those back into the model so that it's consistent. All right, let's talk about masking. So masking is the process that we use to cover pieces of the model that we don't want to paint. So obviously this model is not going to be all one color. It's going to be multiple colors and we need to mask it up appropriately. So these wings are going to be grey on one side, light grey on one side, and a camouflage color on the other. It's just like the box here. I don't know whether you can see that. Is that the right way up? There we go. That's what it's going to look like. So camouflage at the top, and the underside of the model is like you see in the picture there. It's going to be that light grey. So obviously getting those fine lines and everything is quite difficult to do if you're hand painting or anything like that. So we often will mask it up. I'm going to show you a method here with the masking of, where is it? Propeller. Here we go. So we've got the propeller here of this particular aircraft. And as you can see in the picture here, the tips of the propeller are yellow. Now, obviously I've painted the black first, and the tips, you probably can't see it in the model, but the tips are actually marked out which parts need to be painted yellow. Now, with
zoom in a bit more, Mike.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that's pretty small.
No worries. It is reasonably tiny. There we go. So whether or not you're hand painting, airbrushing, spraying with rattle cans, masking can still be beneficial. Again, even if you're hand painting, if you're a little bit unsteady, masking can be great. Now, there's two main, or maybe three main products that I would use to do masking. One is tape. My preferred brand is Tamiya tape. It comes in various different widths. There's about 10 different widths you can use. I will, in this instance, I'm going to use this one, which I think is 18 millimeters, I want to say. It's got a really straight edge. I wouldn't recommend using products like painter's tape because painter's tape is often used in much larger scale things where this is quite fine and you don't get those nice edges. We're putting paint on, generally in modeling, you're putting paint on really, really finely and really, really thin layers, not big, thick layers. So painter's tape is not going to give that same clean edge that you really want in a model. I'm actually going to start this off with the thinner one. Just going to go ahead and apply that. Just paying attention to where that line is on the model itself. There we go. So I've taped there. We're not going to get paint on that. We're just going to get paint on the tip. I'm going to do that with all three. There we go. So just the tip is exposed. The same with that third one. Now, sometimes you have to mask curves. There's two different ways you can do that with the tape itself. The first is to use like a cutting mat. I didn't bring mine with me today, but a green cutting mat, very similar to one like this, that you can stick the tape down on and then use your knife to cut shapes and cut curves. This particular one here, you can see there's lots of curves of various sizes that you can use as a template if you needed to. So you can do that. You can also get tape, specialty masking tape, modeling masking tape that is in fact flexible. So I've taped my edges there. I also don't want to get paint on the inside, so I'm just going to get larger tape there and just stick that there and there. And I'm going to do that on the other side. And there we go. Whether I'm spraying that or hand painting it, I've got it all taped up so that I'm only going to be able to paint those tips of that propeller yellow. You see that? Now, that's one thing you can do. Another thing is when you are gluing a piece, pieces of model together, generally speaking, you want raw plastic to stick to raw plastic. So another thing that you can do, we'll show you on, not on that one. I had a piece here. My apologies. Bear with me just one moment. Sorry, here it is. There we go. So I've got a piece of the tail fin here. There we go. So this piece here, this little tab, I'm actually going to be sticking that into the rest of the plane. It's going to go into the body like so. Now, I want raw plastic to be able to stick to raw plastic. This probably isn't the best example, but it's what I have on hand, so I'm going to use it. So what I want to do if I'm painting that is I'll actually tape up that tab. That'll serve two purposes. First of all, it'll prevent any paint from getting on that tab. So after I've painted it, I can take the tape off and stick it in, and it's going to be glued raw plastic to raw plastic. It'll help it stick. The other thing is that I usually use things like this, these sticks with the alligator clips that will clip onto there, and then I can hold that when I'm painting. Now that tab is obviously really, really small to clip the alligator clip on, and it can flip off very easily. So I'm going to use the tape to go round and round and round. So that does two things. First of all, it's going to prevent paint from getting on that tab, so that when comes time for me to glue that, it's going to be raw plastic on raw plastic, which is what I want. The other benefit is it gives my little alligator clip a little bit more to hold on to. So that's a little bit more secure than what it was before. Now, while I've got this piece out, I'm going to, actually I'll do it on the wing because it's a little larger, and I'm going to use our clear canopy pieces as well. There is another masking product that you can use, and it's called Liquid Mask. There's two brands that I typically use, and we have them both here in the store. One is Vallejo Liquid Mask, this one here, and the other is the Humbrol Maskol, which is a liquid mask as well. These are both rubbery type substances. They're liquid in the bottle, but they air dry, and they literally air dry in minutes. And they can be used for two things. They can be used when you are masking curves, and also when you're masking things where they're indented. So I've got a little demonstration here. If you've got something like that, a piece that's like that. So I'm looking at, if you've got a piece that's in this would be looking at it in profile, as a for instance. 5 minutes to go. So what you want to do is paint the lower parts of the profile. So you paint in here, for instance, and then you fill that profile with the liquid mask, and then you can paint over the top, and you'll be able to paint these parts without disturbing the paint you've already laid down on that part there. I'll show you as a for instance. We've got the canopy pieces here, right? And this is for the Spitfire. And what I want is I want to paint the raised parts around the outside without getting paint on the glass part itself. So out of these two products, I'd probably pick the Vallejo in this case. The Vallejo is slightly thinner than the Maskol, so you really got to pick which one you use and at what time. What I use are bamboo skewers to apply that. Bamboo skewers you get in packs like this at the supermarket. They're dirt cheap. The wood is enough of a point to get really fine details, but not enough of a point to really scratch up your model. So I'm just going to get a little bit of the liquid mask on that, and I'm going to apply it onto that plastic part there. Now, can you see how I've been able to get that? It's probably not the best piece because it's only hanging on precariously. I'll do this one instead.
Just try and focus.
Yeah.
Using a liquid mask.
So,
What's going on here?
liquid mask.
Liquid mask. So we're doing some tutorials. Oh, really? Yeah, just to teach you.
And I'm going to put it on that side.
It's
there.
actually being recorded on YouTube, so you can see it from the start if you like. So we've got another 3 more going on later today.
All right.
So we got 144, is it?
Oh, that's
70-second scale. Yeah, this Spitfire that I'm working on at the moment is a 70-second scale Spitfire.
Yeah.
So what I've done there is I've masked the clear part that I want to stay clear, and I've kept the part that I want to paint in the frame color open.
So how do you
So-
pull that mask off?
I'll show you. So I'm going to close that up. You don't want to leave that bottle open too long because this is what happens.
3 minutes, Michael.
3 minutes, no worries. You get a clump of
Yeah, right.
solid rubber like that. So very quickly, I've only got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to show you, if you're doing camo patterns, I'm going to use the Maskol in this case. So this wing's going to have a camo pattern on it. What I'll do is I'll get the liquid mask and I'll put it on like this, again with my bamboo skewer.
So you're putting it on with a stick, eh?
Yep.
I'm actually building a 32 Airfix bit for at the moment.
So you get little camo patterns, and then when you spray, you're going to be spraying that part. You're not going to be spraying that part. Now, what I've done is I've got a heat gun over here. This is in our last minute or so. Just going to show you what that liquid mask does when it's set. So I've got a heat gun just to accelerate the process. This will set in about 5-6 minutes. I'm going to speed this up with a heat gun, being very careful not to melt anything. You can see that get darker and change color. It actually goes a little bit transparent even. You see how it's gone a little bit transparent in a couple of sections? You can do it the same with this wing. It goes that darker purple. And so this is me being in a bit of a rush. Now I'm going to get my bamboo skewer. And when you've done your painting, you just lift it off with that. You see that? Now this isn't fully dried, so
You got good eyes.
I've been very lucky. Very blessed to have good eyes. The optometrist says I'm going to need glasses next year. He's been telling me that for 6-7 years now. Comes off like that.
Yeah.
And you're left behind the paint. Now, obviously, I haven't put any paint on in this case. So it just peels off. And it leaves the paint underneath completely intact. So that's a couple of masking techniques that you can use. We are going to take a little bit of a break and we'll be on to the next tutorial. I'm going to show you some painting techniques next. So stick around and there'll be more to show off in a very short while. Thank you very much.